I could not be more excited to kick off season 2 than to do so with my dear friend and phenomenal author, Varla Ventura. I have her here today to share a little bit about herself, her journey as an author, and of course, her phenomenal, phenomenal books. So welcome, Varla.
Thanks, Jenna. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful to have you. So I kind of start my interviews by asking a unique question, but it's one that's very telling. What is one thing that bugs you?
Hostas.
Oh, the plant?
Yeah. That's an easy one for me. I really, really dislike hostas. And there's something else that I don't like. I used to call it phormium abuse. Now, we don't really grow phormium too much in Minnesota, but when I lived in San Francisco, which is when I spent a lot of time landscaping, phormium are also known as New Zealand flax.
Oh.
And they're a beautiful, beautiful plant, and they grow quite large. But they were frequently planted together far too close in an effort to kind of make things look better. And I consider that phormium abuse. So those are the kinds of things that really bug me.
Well, that makes sense. And hostas are everywhere here in Minnesota.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, you can't escape them. But that's interesting. Okay, so then alternatively, what is something that you love?
Poison plants.
Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
I mean, I love gardening. I love pumpkins.
Are pumpkins poisonous?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so.
I don't only love poisonous plants, but I do love poisonous plants.
Wow.
Yeah. They're just, I mean, I can't even list all of the plants that I absolutely love. For the numbers that I hate, there's quite a few that I love. So, yeah.
Wow. So can I ask, what is it about poisonous plants in particular that you love?
Yeah. Okay. So one of my absolute favorites is foxglove. It's such a common plant. You see it in like every cottage garden, and it's just very under the radar because it's super toxic and actually has really, really strong medicine. So I think I'm just drawn to the things that have secrets. And I think all of these plants that are considered poisonous, they hold a lot of secrets and they hold a lot of medicine. So I feel like there's a lot that we can learn from them, both in how we grow them and how we handle them and how we treat them and how they in turn treat us. But in general, what I generally grow in my garden these days are poisonous plants, cut flowers, pumpkins, and like maybe a tomato.
A tomato.
Yeah. I mean, how many tomatoes do you need? And everybody else is growing tomatoes. And
that's true.
Nobody wants your tomatoes.
That's true. My neighbor gives them to me in abundance. I would love a tomato or two. I cook with them.
Good to know.
But to your point, though, like when there's an abundance of them and not much else, and they go bad.
Yeah.
And, I think it's cool what you said about poisonous plants because they have something to protect. That's what it kind of sounded like from the medicine piece.
Well, one thing I learned many years ago from an herbalist is that when you are walking in the forest, typically in a natural environment, and even in a naturalized environment, meaning like non-native plants, this can be true, but in particular in like a native plant environment, wherever there's a poison or something that harms, the antidote grows very nearby.
Oh.
So you can kind of look within 2 to 3 feet. The example that she gave was, I think it was poison oak, because we were on the West Coast at the time, so it was poison oak. And while poison oak was growing sort of abundantly in this area, there were also plants that would treat it, that would that you could dress the wounds with, and that would heal the maddening itch from it. So. And then the other thing about poisonous plants very much is that they are sort of like the protectors. They do kind of protect the forest or an environment. And you see this also with like toxic, poisonous mushrooms in particular, that they, for as much as they can harm, they also have this amazing ability to like strengthen the soil and strengthen the plants around them. Wow. And so it is a little bit of a warning. And I feel like it is also, poisonous plants are like the gateway into that crossover world between humans and other worlds, I think, especially because so many of them do cause really intense symptoms like, hallucinations or delusions.
Yeah.
And I think that they can also help us see things. So when working with poisonous plants, it doesn't mean you need to ingest them. There are all kinds of ways to work with them that does not involve consumption, but it does involve a lot of reverence for what they have to show us.
Wow. That's beautiful. I never thought about that before, just what you said about the plants and kind of being so near to, otherworldly things, but it makes sense.
It does.
It absolutely makes sense. I've been trying to kind of draw nearer to plants as medicine. It's not necessarily how I was kind of raised, and it's not in many modernized, societies, but I've been reaching out to local like Ojibwe medicine workers, to get certain teas and things like that. And so that's something I in particular have been looking at, lately, is kind of going back to the earth for medicine. So
well, and it's interesting too because like foxglove, for example, it's synthesized now, but digoxin or digoxin, it's one of, I think there's 2 different medicines that come from it, is from digitalis. It is from digitalis purpurea, which is foxglove. It's a medicine that treats heart attacks and heart conditions like heart arrhythmia. And so, and then, all of the things in like the nightshade family, like Atropa belladonna and henbane, they all have these things called scopolamines in them. And they're like these really, really active constituents that have been used to treat pain, to like the Greeks used to like mix that stuff in to like use as an anesthesia. And, even like one of the drugs that they put you on when you have breast cancer is called tamoxifen, and that's a synthesized version of something that was discovered in a Pacific yew. So like when I was researching my most recent book, I had a lot of fun reading the like really intense scientific medical journals and recognizing the like the botanical names and the kind of original whatever the indigenous wisdom was for it, or the witch wisdom that a lot of times the scientific process is just proving something that was there all along, the folk medicine as we call it, the folk medicine. But it's very interesting because a lot of our modern medicine, and I like had some kind of eye procedure, and I'm like, hey, can I see those drops you're putting in my eyes? Oh, you know what? I think, and I looked, and it was, I can't remember the name of the drops, but it was a derivative of one of the constituents that I knew was in belladonna, which is the reason it's called belladonna, is because people, like ladies, used to put it in their eyes to make their eyes dilate and shine. And it's still used to this day. Again, it's a synthesized lab-made version of this like drug that's naturally in the plants. So
that's hearing you speak about that reminds me almost a little bit of your stories. And one thing that I wanted to ask you, so one thing I really admire about you as a writer is the collection of stories that you have. It's just phenomenal. And for those listening, Varla has, is it 6 published books, and your 7th is about to come out?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep. That sounds right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like there's like dozens of like all of these ebooks and stuff out there, but I don't really don't tally those up as books.
Okay. But there's 6
print
stories. And it's everything from fairies, pukas, and changelings, all very much rooted in magic, which is one thing I love about it. Among the mermaids, is it banshees, werewolves, and vampires?
You're
is
amazing.
That the word?
Yes.
I love them.
I have really
fan.
long titles, so I'm really impressed that you got those in order and everything.
Thank you. I'm a fan. And then you also have, well, where it all started for me was Paranormal Parlor. Actually, that was the one that I was drawn to, and so. What I wanted to ask is why, because you're a very gifted writer, so why did you choose to write in this way? And her books, for those listening, are collections of Scientific research, as you can hear from her speaking, she's obviously very well researched and very well read. Nerdy, nerdy. That's a better way to say it. Yes. So it's a collection of research stories and data, along with firsthand accounts, along with classic literature and folk tales and all this. So why did you choose to write in that way, where you kind of take your reader on a really fun journey, through all of these collections?
I don't know. I don't really know. The first two books that I really worked on were the Book of the Bazaar and Beyond Bazaar. And that was a little bit more of a collaboration with the editor. Her name is Rachel Leach. I'm still really good friends with her. And she and I worked together on those two books, figuring out like the different chapters and what we would put in those chapters. And it kind of started because I came into the publisher one day and I had this book that was like a book of Halloween. And I was like, I want to do something like this. And I don't know exactly how it all evolved, but before we knew it, we were just creating this amazing book that was just full of all of these strange little facts. And I really grew up, like I always loved those like Ripley's Believe It or Not type books, and Fate magazine and all those kinds of things, and then ghost stories. Love reading ghost stories, especially short little ghost stories. Yeah. And I think, really like one time I think I was like at a party or something, and I was just spouting off some random fact about opening umbrellas and doors or something like that, and a friend of mine was like, hey, have you ever thought about a book like that? Like making that into a book? Yeah. And so that's kind of how it evolved. And those books are a little bit more of like collections of sort of random things. They're like trivia books. But then when it came to start doing like what I kind of call like the magical creatures books, which was like banshees, werewolves and vampires, and by the way, I had to fight the publisher to get banshees first on that, because
Why?
I think banshees are the coolest. Because vampires are much more of a like keyword, and as are werewolves. But I was like, look, no one's doing banshees. Like, let's just put banshees up front. Plus, it's alphabetically sound. So So when I kind of got into those books, that's when I started putting more of myself into the books. So I really, like with each chapter introduction, I didn't really mean for this to happen, but generally the way I write is I always write introductions last, and I usually advise other writers to do that as well, even though a lot of times you're supposed to send in your introduction with your packet to your agent or whatever. And I don't know, I just kind of, I find that writing the introduction, once I've sort of figured out what the chapter structure is going to be and what the topic is going to be, or the book tells me what it's going to be, then I'll go in and I'll write the introduction. And for whatever reason, it ends up just being a really, ends up being sort of a personal story. Yeah. And that really sort of took me by surprise a little bit when I started writing that way, but I just kind of went with it. But it really wasn't until Paranormal Parlor that I feel like that was the book that I put the most of myself in.
That one's my favorite. That's probably why.
Oh, why, thank you. I think for me, that I've always been a gatherer of like other people's stories, and also trying to find like the story behind the story, or the history behind a story. There's always like a story. Every plant has a story. Every haunted house has a story. Yeah. And so I've always been a great, that I really enjoy the finding out what that story is, and, try to connect the threads and things like that. And like the fiction writer in me is like, ooh, I could like make this into a horror story. But really I just end up writing these nonfiction, these nonfiction like collections of folklore and such. And, but with Paranormal Parlor, originally I thought I'm going to do a collection where it's like, that book was really magical, actually, because I thought I'm going to gather other people's stories. I did that a little bit in the Book of the Bazaar and Beyond Bazaar, where I interviewed people and they told me their like ghost stories. So I reached out to a bunch of people, and I thought I would just have like a chapter where it's like other people's ghost stories, and it's not how it worked at all. It ended up that the stories that I I wanted it to have like some classic ghost tales, firsthand accounts, and then also like a compilation of like haunted places that you could go, legends of cemeteries, like all the stuff that I just love, the history of women in the paranormal in particular, which is a topic that
I loved that part of the book.
Yeah. Oh, good. Me too. I thought that should be a whole book.
Yeah,
but,
it should.
But I have something coming out that's specifically related to that I'll mention in a minute. But anyway, so that book, it was just amazing because all the topics that I had, all the chapter topics, when I interviewed people at the very end and like toward the end of creating the manuscript, and I interviewed them, and I totally did it a very non-traditional way. I didn't record anything. I just listened to the story and took notes, and then I wrote it up, and then I sent it back to the person, and I was like, do you approve this? And because I kind of wanted that cohesiveness of voice in there, because otherwise when you have people submitting their stories, it can get very like jumpy all over the place, and a lot of people are good storytellers but not necessarily good writers,
right? So
anyway, like each person's story ended up fitting into the sections of the book that I had created. For example, I had chosen this story that I had like a whole section about like child ghosts.
Yeah.
And I interviewed someone, and they told me about this like ghost boy that used to come into their house when their wife was really sick.
I sensed maybe you were going to go. He was my favorite.
I love that story so much. I'm still in touch with that author. Wow. And then like my friend Jeff, he told me this story. It was kind of like his first transformative like paranormal experience. Like he'd been investigating and like writing about the paranormal. It was the first time he had seen a ghost, and it was in the Paris catacombs. Yeah. Well, I had already chosen this book this story that I really love that was set in Paris, and it's an old horror story, but it's by this man who was an architect, and he was like famous for Gothic revival. And so in this story, you go down this alleyway and you go to this address, and you end up going into this like apartment, and behind this door is this incredible altar. And it's just this like really, really detailed, because the guy was an architect.
Yeah.
And it's just a really beautiful story. And I knew I wanted to include that, but I was like, where is this going to go? And then I had this phone call with my friend Jeff, and he was like, told me this story, and this is amazing. I'm going to put it here in this section. And so those things just kind of kept unfolding in that book. And so it kind of rearranged itself in that way.
I appreciate that you allowed that to happen. I think where some people go wrong with their art, whether it be writing, painting, or even architecture, is they think they have to stick to what they started with. But when you let a work speak for itself and grow that way, it becomes, I think, what it's meant to be. And especially in that book, everything does feel like it's in its rightful place. And so I'm really glad that you allowed that to happen. And that reminded me of something else I wanted to ask you, which is, how did you do it? You know, in every single one of your books, you have these beautiful collections. Like you've spoken with so many people and read so many stories that, of course, we can't cover them all, but how do you get in touch with the people who tell you their stories or share things with you? How did you kind of build that network?
That's a great question. So for Paranormal Parlor, I reached out to people that I knew had stories like that. Kind of like the midnight podcasters and radio hosts and things, and people that I had worked with or had been on their shows over the years. So that was people who I actually, just reached out to them directly. With some of my, certainly with the Book of the Bazaar and Beyond Bazaar, especially with Beyond Bazaar, the Book of the Bazaar came out, and I think I was on Coast to Coast talking about it. And they always do the second half or the last half hour of callers, and people would call in and they would tell their own stories. And so I sort of opened my, had an email address. It was you can write to me here if you want to share stories. And then so in the second book, Beyond Bazaar, which I still really wish we had called The Bride of Bazaar. That's what I wanted to call it, because Frankenstein.
That. Yeah.
But whatever. But the Beyond Bazaar was fine. And then, anyway, so people had sent stories, and I started compiling those and saving them, and then putting those into the second manuscript if I had permission and everything. So some stories came to me in that way. In Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, I know a couple vampires, so I interviewed them. In the Mermaid book, that was the toughest one to find people who would, like, I always love to include some kind of like first-hand account, or I guess it's second-hand because it's as told to me, but somebody's actual encounter. And it's funny because mermaids are like, more people believe in them, but less people admit that they're real than probably any other. It's like everybody wants to believe in mermaids, and yet very few people, like, oh, someone will sit down and talk to you about Bigfoot for like hours, but they will be like, mermaids. I don't think so. So it was very interesting to see that line, that divide within like sort of that paranormal community.
Yeah.
So I kept at it, and I just said, really, really looking for anyone who's had an experience, like any kind of firsthand account or whatever. And I finally got 2 stories that are in that book. And that was all I needed, really, were those 2 stories. And one was like a person having an encounter, kind of like seeing a ghost or another kind of like cryptid type creature. It was like this kind of merman. And then the other...
That one was chilling. I apologize to interrupt, but I have to tell you, that one, actually, of all the stories I've read in any of your books, that one was chilling. So I highly recommend those listening get Among the Mermaids for so many reasons. But
great summer read. Great beach read.
Yeah, well, and I read it on the beach. I took it with me to Florida and read it on the beach.
Now I'm terrified to go in the water.
No, that one was like, whoa. Because I had never heard of an encounter like that, and even the description, as it was so vividly written, it was chilling. That one actually scared me.
The woman who shared that story with me actually shared a sketch, which we couldn't put the sketch in the book because the book has this like a design aesthetic, and it was not really that kind of a book. But the sketch was, it was creepy.
Yeah, I would believe it.
It was pretty creepy.
What did you do with it?
I mean, she just emailed it to me. I'm sure it's still in my email.
Okay,
I'll dig it out and see if I can find it. It's got to be in there somewhere. It was kind of. I've seen other sketches in like old fairy books and things. This definitely had some of those attributes, like one of the things with like Among the Mermaids in particular, so like Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, that lends itself to the dark side, right? But mermaids, we get this impression that they're like these beautiful lovely topless women who are just like out there waiting to drown you. And I kind of wanted to shed some light on the darker side of that, and sort of the more horrific side of that, and you know, also the whimsical and beautiful side, but and you know, there's some historical facts in there too about like how the, you know, our view of mermaids evolved and things like that. But yeah, that woman's encounter was really scary. And I was so thrilled.
That she wrote in. Well, I mean, I can't thank you enough just for writing these books, because one of the reasons that I was so drawn to them is that I'm in a place where I need to believe in magic again. I think we lose a little bit of that as we get older, and so I guess I wanted to ask if you're comfortable going there. Do you believe in magic in these things you write about?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. How did that start for you? How did you kind of build that love of magic?
I was born with it. My mother is a witch. I was raised in an unusual environment, which I did not realize was an unusual environment until I was much older. Much older, like in my 20s. And I was like, oh, people went to church and stuff? Like, oh, I'm sorry. Not me. I was raised a heathen. So I think I had a bit of an unusual upbringing, just in that, like I said, my mom is a witch. I grew up with, playing psychic parlor games, had, tarot cards around. We would do color psychic games, or like hold up the card and guess what it is. I learned about like some of my earliest memories are of plants and like herbs and my mom using plants in a specific way. And when I was really little, we lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I have, I remember hiking in like the San Bruno Mountains and identifying like wild fennel and just a lot of magic was around me, I mean, my mom was always like sporting something with a crescent moon and it was just, something Egyptian. She just had that sort of like witchy goddess vibe. She wasn't a hippie because she was very young when she had my older siblings, so she never really had time to be a hippie, but she was always very interested in the occult and the pursuit of kind of like that other side and other knowledge from various religions. She was raised Roman Catholic, so she was kind of drawn to like the magic aspect of Catholicism, but had been not allowed to complete her confirmation because I can't remember what the reasoning was, but for some reason she wasn't able to be confirmed and she was kind of kicked out of the church and then she got pregnant really young, blah, blah, blah. So, and then her parents, my grandparents, were both deaf. And I think that had a profound impact on me as a child. My mom's first language was sign. And so that was also one of my first languages. And just there's a lot of telepathy that happens with people when they have a, classic sense that is gone. So like my grandmother was extremely telepathic.
Wow.
And even in the latter part of her life, I was in my 20s and she had dementia. And I would go and visit with her and we would sit side by side and we would sort of like, sit in my auntie's garden and we'd just look out and she would tell me things. And even though she was, was partially signing, she had this, she wasn't mute. She had this very soft voice. But she would tell me these stories and I could understand everything she was telling me. And a lot of times with people with dementia, they'll revert back to like a time when like their like favorite time of life. And I think for her, it was when she was about 10 years old and like her life changed after that because that's when she lost her hearing shortly thereafter. So anyway, I think there was just a lot of like trusting of intuition in that situation. I also had an uncle who was, in a terrible accident, was paralyzed. And so my mom, we grew up in this environment that wasn't necessarily like any kind of like nuclear family. And then my dad, he's more of like a kind of a wild man from Texas, a bit of an atheist, just kind of, but anyways, then we moved from the Bay Area up into like the middle of nowhere. My parents still live there. It's totally off grid. You can see millions of stars, but you don't have electricity and, the phones don't always work. Gets a lot of snow. It's up in the Sierra Nevada foothills. But as a kid, when we moved up there, I was like 7. So I was like peak Alice in Wonderland, Fairyland. And so I would just sit for hours out in the woods, picking at things. But like one of the things my mom would say is, all right, girls, you can go into the woods, but don't go sitting or messing with a fairy mound. And she would point out like the circles of, we'd go on walks and she'd point out the circles of like moss or mushrooms and be like, I don't want you stepping in that. And we knew not to don't fall asleep in the fairy mound. That's solid advice. So those are the kind of, that's the kind of advice I got from my mom. What kind of tea is good for cramps and not to fall asleep in a fairy mound. My mom wasn't like, do your homework and brush your teeth,
Yeah. Wow. Don't fall asleep in the fairy mound. You actually kind of naturally answered my next question because it comes out in your writing that your mother was most likely an influence, because that very piece of the fairy mound was something I remember from your book. So I was going to ask you if your mother was influential in this way.
Absolutely.
And you beautifully already explained that she was. And I've always loved sign, but I had no idea that there was some telepathy involved in it, which I mean, I admire it all the more for that now. That's
beautiful. They used to do like those parlor tricks. My mom would tell me stories where they would, their friends would all come over from the deaf club and they'd all sit around a table and they would like think of an object and have like my mom's brother go into the other room and get it and retrieve it, when he was young. And this was like 1930s, 1940s. So it's kind of at the tail end of like the sort of, spiritualist everyday parlor games. But the other thing, I mean, my siblings would all joke, but like you smoke a cigarette 6 blocks away and grandma knew. So
Wow. Can't hide anything. That's awesome. Wow. I saw that your mother would also come with you sometimes, because in Paranormal Parlor, you yourself go and stay in some of these haunted places, and I noticed that you would take her with you sometimes.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
And when my son was really little, when he was a baby, she would come down for a couple of days, in the middle of the week, like what we were kind of trying to cobble together the child care before we had to put him in full-time daycare, and we were trying to get to the 6-month mark, and so she would come down and she would stay on like Wednesday through Thursday. And then she would always tell me like the dreams that she would have. And like, she was convinced there was this like kind of small dark haired woman that was in my apartment. And, I mean, anytime I actually took my mom to Kauai this last year for her 80th birthday. Wow. And, that was a lot of fun. It was somewhere she'd always wanted to go.
And you made it happen.
Yeah. And I mean, we've always connected on that like magic level. So, we can have those kind of discussions, and that doesn't bother me. I think, maybe some people in my family don't want to hear about like, the evolution of the Kabbalah or whatever, but I'm fine with it,
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I'm so grateful that she did teach you that from a young age, because now I think, like I said, one thing I appreciate about your work is that it was very restorative for me. I was raised very differently, very Christian, and to believe that anything like this was evil. I was into Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and my church had a whole sermon about how we need to really not be watching those shows. And so that kind of died pretty early on, unfortunately. But then through, various life pathways, I've opened myself up again to magic and to the paranormal, and seen that it's not so evil, it's beautiful. And I think we could all use a little bit more magic in our lives. And the more that I've read your stories, the more that it's like, it created this gratitude, because it's like, in so many ways, life is rather magical, especially when we're talking about what you shared about herb lore and plants. It's like there's so much magic in every day. And so I've been wanting to thank you for a long time for writing these books, because it's like it teaches you to just believe again. And the more I think you believe in the magic of the world and that divine things exist, the more you can see that divinity in yourself and the possibilities for yourself. And I'm getting a little emotional while saying this, but I just had to tell you, like, that's one thing I'm so grateful for with your books, is it woke me up again, and it inspired me to just feel magical myself. So
thank you, Jenna.
So thank you for answering the call to do this.
That's well, one thing I really believe too about that, like the magic or what magic is, I think like when someone's telling a really good story, or you're lost in a story, you're reading a story, you actually are sort of entering fairy time. Like the rest of the world is suspended. And even if for that little tiny bit of time you can suspend your disbelief and believe that there was a man walking along the shore and heard a mermaid calling to him, when you can suspend that doubt, I think it clicks something in your brain. And if without suspension of doubt, we're not able to actually make innovative leaps. So honestly, like if you go into a lab and you say, or you go into a study and you're like, there's no cure for cancer. That's no. You're like, we don't know the cure yet. I'm going to suspend the doubt that this cannot, I'm going to suspend the doubt of the impossible, and I'm going to keep trying until I find it. And so I think that that's something that sometimes we are disconnected with, and where magic comes in, and kind of why like fairy tales and the belief in fairies is important to us, is that understanding that there could be an unseen world, and kind of like, looking over your shoulder, it gives you just that little bit of that edge of like, well, what if? And it's the what if that we need, because otherwise we won't make those big leaps, whether it's like, again, like something medical, or it's something just within ourselves. Like, you need that to make the leap. And so I think that's why we really need stories. It's why we need ghost stories. It's why we need fairy tales. It's why we need that belief in the unseen. And certainly people can get that with religion. There's no doubt about that. I think, unfortunately, that's leveraged in a different way, and there's a lot of good versus evil. In the fairy kingdom, it's not really like that. It's sort of in between. It's not unlike the plant kingdom. You know, Digitalis isn't sitting there lurking, waiting to jump out and poison you. But if you start poking at it and chewing on its leaves and flowers, you're going to get a stomach ache or worse, right? So it's there. It has certain, shall we say, menacing qualities, but only if you mess with it. So I feel like, you know, the fairy kingdom is kind of that way too. There's like a certain reverence that needs to be held, and a certain level of respect. And that also is the respect that we, you know, would have for the natural environment. You know, you don't chuck garbage by a fairy tree.
Right.
For a variety of reasons. Number one, fairies are going to come after you, and they're not going to take kindly to that. Number two, you're like gross if you do it. And number three, like, you could actually be damaging the like ecological system that then produces, you know, flowers that are attract pollinators that then help your food crops. So you're literally like damaging your own livelihood by doing so. Obviously, we have that on a greater scale in the world, and that can be kind of a daunting and overwhelming thing. But that's where, like, having those little slips of magic and recognizing the little, you know, coincidences and synchronicities, that can really, it can anchor you. And I think it gives us all a lot of hope. It gives me hope. That's where I try and like default to when I'm feeling really overwhelmed and hopeless. It's just like, but ghosts. but ghosts.
Well, on that note, I've got to tell you a story now. Because of all your books and all of the mythical, magical, paranormal creatures, the ones that I feel like I understand the least are fairies. And I don't know if that's because I don't have as much exposure to the lore, or for whatever reason, it's harder for my mind to comprehend their world and how they exist than some of the other creatures. But on that note, I ordered all of your books on Amazon, right? And I ordered them separately. You know, I'd be almost finishing one and needed to get the next one here right when I was done, because I didn't want to leave your world. And so I was just finishing up, I think it was the second book of the Bazaar, and I had ordered Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings, and it must have been like a Wednesday. I got, you know, the Amazon notifications. You get Amazon tells you when it's shipped, when it's out for delivery, and when it arrives, and then, you know, you get the picture.
Get the little picture of the package on your doorstep.
And so that happened on a Wednesday with Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings, okay? It came on like a Wednesday. I opened it up. The book was there. Great. Put it on my shelf for when I was done with Bazaar. Well, the following day, I was not home, and Amazon started sending me notifications again. It sent me one saying my order had shipped, and I clicked in like, what order? I shouldn't have any other orders. And when I clicked in, it said it was the Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings book. I got another notification that it was out for delivery, so on its way to my house. And then one final notification that it had arrived. And I was very confused because I thought, no, I got this book yesterday. Why am I getting these notifications? And this has never happened with anything I've ordered on Amazon, whether it was your books or the inventory for my house. I mean, I have 6 children. I get a huge amount of like my house's inventory on Amazon. I order quite a bit. And this has never happened before. And so I get home after getting all these notifications, and I see that, in fact, there is a package on my doorstep. But when I open it, there's nothing inside. It was empty. And I double checked because I thought I was going crazy, and I was like, wait, did I actually get this book yesterday, or what happened? So I double checked my shelf, and the Fairies book is still on my shelf. I'm like, okay, it is here. I did get it yesterday. What is this? And then
it's the invisible copy.
Yeah, right? It was so strange. And so the weirdest part though is that there's no record on Amazon of my ever getting it twice. It only has. So I got those notifications in the moment, but then when I go back and I look at my previous orders, as you can on Amazon, only one book shows up, and it was the original delivery. So what's that about?
Okay, well, I think you got a delivery from the fairies, and especially because you kind of said that you hadn't, like, you were still kind of trying to wrap your mind around the concept of fairies and connecting with fairies, and I think that they're tricksters and they love to play tricks. And also the reason that we can't, I get asked a lot, why can't we see fairies? And there's a variety of like origin stories to this, but my favorite is that the fairies actually have a cloak of invisibility. It was given to them by Manan MacLear, who was the son of the sea god, who allowed the fairies, instead of leaving Ireland specifically, allowed the fairies to hide themselves and only reveal themselves when need be. And so there's many variations of this cloak of invisibility, or a hat, or something that allows them to shield themselves from their eyes, so from your eyes. So it's not necessarily that people can't see fairies, right? It's that fairies don't reveal themselves. So it's a little bit of like a different way of looking at it. But just the invisibility. So I think you got like the fairy version of that. So I hope you put it somewhere, for future reading.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. What do I do with it? What does it mean?
I would just, I think maybe I'd go set it out by a tree or something and say, thank you, here's your copy. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said that, because that book is very charged. I had a few interesting experiences writing that book. And the thing about fairies is that for the most part, there's a few fairies that aren't, but most fairies have a real trickster element to them. They love to mess around with people. They love to mess around with your sense of reality and your sense of security and your sense of safety, and just kind of like shake up your path a little bit. Yeah. Not necessarily in a, like, there's not, like I said, there's not like a good versus evil kind of thing. How you handle it can make you feel like afraid or not afraid. But generally there's just this, there's just a little bit of, I don't want to say malice. It's just like, it's like a trickster element, right? It's a little bit of like a Puck kind of vibe. And so when I was writing that book, as always with all of my books, no matter how far in advance I know that I'm writing them, it's always down to like the last 5 days of me being up until 4 a.m, just like pushing, because you get this thing when you think you know everything you want to put in the book, and then you just get this thing that sort of like, wait, this is my last chance. I wanted to put this in. I wanted to put that in. So you kind of have this like panic at the end. That's how I write anyway. I'm sure everybody's different. Some people maybe even get their manuscript in on time, but not me. So I'm like a panicker. So I panic write. I sweat through the night and like can't sleep, and like, drink a ton of wine and just try and like get through it. I think I actually thanked a winemaker in that book. But anyway, so which I probably shouldn't have said that, because this next story might seem like I made like a drunken mistake. But so that book also arranged itself. I had some ideas of what I wanted to cover, and I decided to sort of just like let myself, or let the book follow the thread that was sort of connecting different creatures to one another. And the research kind of helped me with that. But the organization sort of happened organically. Was again not exactly what I thought it was going to be, but it was kind of going to be. And anyway, so I had this one section that I had in there for quite some time, and it was about hobgoblins and sort of like domestic fairies that mess around with your stuff, like the ones that take your keys but also protect your animals. The ones that kind of like to be, they're like the domesticated fairies. They like to be around people, but they need to be sort of respected. Like they don't come and sit and hang out with you on your couch or whatever, but they'll, you give them a little offering, you do your part to keep the room tidy, and then they're the protective spirits. There's all kinds of, like, across culturally, there's, protective, like, creatures, fairies, whatever you want to call them. So anyway, so I'm working on the hobgoblin one, and I'm actually literally working about the part about things going missing. And again, I'm like probably a day past my deadline at this point. And I'm just like, just give me like one more day. And the editor she was really nice about it. And so I go in the next day, and I had stayed up till like 2 a.m. working on this section because I just really wanted to convey it right. And then I went to bed. And you got to understand, like, I've been working in Microsoft Word since, like it was invented pretty much. So I'm very comfortable with document recovery or like getting rid of things or like being able to find older versions of things. So anyway, I open up the manuscript and I'm like, okay, let me read what I wrote last night because I know I was tired and it's gone. And it's not a whole chapter, but it's like a quarter of a chapter. It's gone. And it's like, it was really important to me that go in there. And so my immediate response was, and at this point, again, like I'm a day past my deadline, I thought I would like get really upset, but I didn't. I just went, all right, lesson learned, got it. I guess I didn't talk about you the way that I should have talked about you. Oh. And I went back into like all the notes that I had and went back into like all my research. And I just rewrote the whole thing. I just didn't complain. I was like, okay, you did not like something about the way that because you disappeared. Sure, I could have like accidentally gotten rid of that by copying and pasting over it. But I went back through document recovery and it was gone.
Wow.
In every version, it was gone.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I said that wrong. So this is my chance to get it right. And so I just had to rewrite that whole section with like, negative 10 hours to,
right,
to turn it
right.
in.
Wow.
But that book was just fraught with things like that. Not necessarily bad things, but just a lot of things that felt beyond my control.
Huh.
And I tried to not fight it because you really don't want to fight with the fairies. It's not a war you'll win.
Yeah, no, I believe it. I believe it. Wow. Wow. So then, in terms of what you wrote next, did it feel right? When it was gone, you had to rewrite it. Did it feel right when you went back again?
Well, I didn't have anything to compare it to,
that's true.
Which was sad. But I felt good about that. Yeah, I like how that section came about. I think I probably said more. I probably had more words, but I maybe didn't get my point across. So, I don't know. I don't even remember what, like, I couldn't even remember exactly what I wrote. I just knew what my point kind of was. And so I just started all over again, which is a very frustrating thing to do as a writer. But for some reason, I wasn't super frustrated about it. I was just like, immediately knew that it was because I had done it wrong.
Yeah.
I just knew. And I was like, look, I'm writing about fairies. If I cannot acknowledge their existence and apologize for getting something wrong, what business do I have even writing this book?
That's true.
So I was like, okay, we're going to just move on now. Like kind of looking over my shoulder, like, I get it. Yeah. And the fact that it was the ones that were in your house, like I was just like, all right, fine.
I'll fix it. Yeah. I think there's a lot of freedom and acceptance, and I can relate to being just under the wire. You push through and then it's just gone. But there is a little bit of freedom when it's like, okay, all right, that just happened and I'm just going to go back. And it takes a little bit of the pressure off.
Well, the publisher didn't know any different. I mean, I think I told the editor later, and she was like this very witchy lady, and so she kind of chuckled at it, but I didn't point it out. By the way, can you double check this section because I erased it? Like, nope, everything's fine. Here's how I meant it to be all along.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I like that. And I fully believe that it was the fairies that made it disappear. There's no other
and so that's why when that story of your book disappearing or like an invisible copy, like that, it's not just that it was, you got a notification. It's that an actual envelope was delivered to your door and it was empty.
Yeah.
That's
bizarre.
The wild part about it. So
never happened ever.
No, and there's that transmission. So I think, and I like that you kind of mentioned that you were like trying to understand fairies better, because I think if you just think about that, that's like basic evidence, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I was
kinda.
like, this is weird.
Well, now I wonder if they're the ones mysteriously deleting my writings sometimes. I shared it with this writers group that I'm in. It's not a story I've never told my listeners either, but sometimes when I'm writing really intense things, like a lot of my stories are kind of centered on social justice, although in a fantastical kind of way. And I feel a very strong pull to write them for purposes of social justice. And on a couple occasions where I'm sitting in this very seat actually writing, all of a sudden things will just start deleting and I'm not pushing the backspace button. And I assumed that it was some evil kind of spirit, like trying to stop me from, because again, usually it's like things meant to help and to restore something and to root out some of these evil things and plant some seeds of reconciliation. Right. But it's happened probably 3 times now where all of a sudden
something's telling you, you got it wrong, do it over.
Maybe. Yeah. So I'm rethinking that now. Yeah, I know. I'm thinking that again. It's like, because it's just...
You might have some success with making a small, something shiny or like a really pretty stone or something that you put by your computer that you're just like, here, play with this.
Oh.
That might be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Because I do very much tap into some things when I'm writing, and I think I've never considered that before. But
sometimes just acknowledge. It could be a ghost too, but like sometimes it's just like acknowledging, and it also can be like, that's the amazing thing about writing is that there's another entity in the process. There's something divine in it, whether you're writing a book about history, you're writing a book about plants, or you're creating characters and creating this like incredible fictional fantastical landscape. There's another, that's the muse, that's the thing it's the invisible thing we're all kind of like grasping for. And so interference from that can be a sign that you're on the right path. I would think like, hey, at least it's being acknowledged, but you might want to say, could you stop erasing it?
Yeah. I need to just tell it to stop. No, I need to just tell it to stop, because full disclosure, it's embarrassing, but whatever. I just start screaming like a child. I do. It's just,
you've had this just what you consider a profound thought, and then something's erasing it.
Yeah. Before my eyes, I'm watching it happen, and I kind of freeze, and I don't know how to stop it because I'm not the one pushing the button. And so I think now that it's happened a couple times, I hope it doesn't happen again. Thanks to you, I have some tools. I think that maybe I'll employ.
A little
and
offering, a little acknowledgement, a little request.
Yeah.
We always say that with hauntings too. It's like, if it's really bothering you, just ask it to stop. Now that doesn't always work for everyone, but it's worth a shot.
It's better than screaming because that's it's pretty incoherent. I think it communicates that I don't like it, but technically there's no direction.
Maybe be a little clearer with your, you can yell. That's fine.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I have one more question about fairies, because as I said, I'm a little bit more confused about them. Do they ever choose to physically reveal themselves? Does that happen sometimes?
And there's something that, like the second sight is sort of the like old folk term, very used in Ireland, for example. Like the second sight is basically means that somebody has this other level of vision where they are able to see fairies or other worldly creatures. We might call that like psychic or intuition. Some people can see ghosts, some people hear them. There's all these different types of like clairvoyance. So second sight is a little bit of like a clairvoyance. There are certain types of people that are like historically known to be able to like interact with fairies, such as like practicing druids and witches. And there are things that you can do to kind of like connect you to the fairies or get them to trust you. And then sometimes they just reveal themselves because they're trying to prove a lesson. So for example, pukas, the biggest trickster in all the fairy kingdom is the puka. It's like the equivalent of coyote and, like in a lot of like indigenous stories, this like trickster spirit that comes in and isn't causing you harm, but is definitely making you rethink your life choices. So you'll be stumbling home from the pub, like going on this like dark road. You should have been home hours ago, and this giant shape-shifting creature appears, often in the form of like a black horse with glowing red eyes or a very, very large, terrifying rabbit.
Oh.
And occasionally you'll hear stories of pukas as like eagles and other things, but generally it's like a rabbit or a horse. And the horse will just like throw you on its back and just take you on this midnight ride across the moors, like along the cliffside, where you're basically pretty sure you're going to die, but you don't die. And then it'll kind of deposit you. And then you got an excuse. So like, wow, the puka took me on this wild ride. And it kind of scares you straight, right? So it's I think a way of like, hey, you're literally on the wrong path. So I'm going to scare you to the point. Yes, there are those occasional stories where people slip up a cliff and die, but it's not from it's not the puka's fault, right? It's the human's fault.
Wow.
So sometimes fairies can kind of catch you unawares, but there are certain places where you can go or shouldn't go, right? Don't fall asleep on the fairy mound. Don't go past, like, there's certain like graveyards or fairy trees that you shouldn't go past in the middle of the night. And then the other thing is that the concept of like a changeling. So a changeling is basically a fairy switch. So it's a human baby that is taken into the fairy kingdom, and then a fairy baby is left in its place. It's almost always children, but sometimes it's like older adults or like teenagers. Sometimes in the story it'll just say young maiden. You have no idea how old that is. Could be 24, it could be 13, right? And they're basically like raised in the other world. And they say that people who are changelings, like the ones that are human that are raised in the fairy kingdom, when they make it back into the human world, they always have the ability to see fairies. So like you can walk into a market and see which vendors are actually like fairy women. Wow. Other people have had like transformative experiences, like gone through, like a death scare or heard the banshee. The banshee scream can also like develop that ability to see fairies and commune with fairies. And some people are just born with it. So it's similar to, in many traditions around the world, in order to have that sort of other ability, that second sight or that clairvoyance, I think that that's a gift, and it's a gift of a healer. And usually you have to go through something really traumatic and frightening to tap into that healing power. And you see that in like traditional healers, in shamans, but you see that also like just kind of cross-culturally. You see that with people who have had to go through something that was a little bit traumatic. I will add the caveat, however, that frequently what were thought of as fairies or changelings also can today be identified as people who were born with birth defects. And you're talking about a time when people didn't have a lot of knowledge of medicine, and they would put labels on things they didn't understand. And so there's a lot of othering in traditional folklore, perhaps not in really traditional folklore, but in the recorded Victorian versions that we have, which were frequently recorded by men of the cloth, white men who were, of the cloth, because that means that they were educated. They had probably gone to like a seminary school or something. They were writers, and they had the ability to travel around and gather these stories. It was frequently the case. So, in particular with like a lot of the Irish literature and some of the European stories, the Scandinavian literature that comes to us, and of course, like don't even get me started on like Indigenous America, right? And how that's been filtered down. But a lot of those stories do come with this like, not so, like the ghost stories come through beautifully from like Victorian times, but a lot of the fairy tales, all of a sudden there'll be like the devil will appear, or there'll be this moral in there, which may not really be, so you can kind of just see the supposition of like a religious rite kind of taking over a traditional story. So you always kind of have to read those things with a grain of salt, or a bucket of salt.
A bucket, yes, in some cases. I think that's really helpful to know, because sometimes, if you don't kind of have that in mind with particular stories, you might not be able to filter it that way and know that there might be some of that influence on it. Another thing I wanted to know is, what is your favorite mythical, magical, or paranormal creature? Do you have a favorite? Okay.
Yes, I do.
Oh,
Yes, I
okay.
do. It's banshees.
Please tell me more. Mostly because they
I
terrify
say that,
me.
yes. I think that's why I love them, because they are terrifying.
Yeah.
They're really scary. Now, I have never heard or seen a banshee. And the thing is you don't want to, because it doesn't mean you're going to die. It means someone you love is going to die, which is way worse, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's way worse.
Absolutely.
It taps into our greatest fear of losing someone that we love. And, but I think they're just so fascinating. There's this whole level of like, the feminist in me is like, interesting that these are always depicted as women.
Yeah.
But there's this wild nature, sort of like the Valkyries in Norse religion, who are like these psychopomps that come down and they decide who's going to live and who's going to die on the battlefield, and who's going to go to Valhalla, and who's going to go over to like, Freya's side. And they're like these female creatures on wings. And so banshees are a little bit like that. But for anyone who doesn't know, banshee like literally translates in Gaelic to like the fairy mound. And you see the same word used throughout like Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. There are what I consider counterparts or the equivalent of banshees around the world, however. La Llorona is an excellent example, but there's certain characteristics. Female, or with a feminine appearance, making a very mournful cry. If you've ever heard traditional Irish keening, which is something that is done at funerals, it's this very like sorrowful moan. It can be very guttural and very like you could really feel it. Some people will only hear the banshee. If you see a banshee, sometimes the banshee appears as a beautiful young maiden who's just sort of like coming up to your door, and you answer the door, and then she sort of shapeshifts and transforms into this like horrific gaping mouth kind of ghostly thing, with like long flowing terrifying hair. Sometimes she's a like little old lady walking down the lane that you innocently talk to, and then she sort of like looks at you and transforms. The appearance of the banshee is said that like death is nigh, so it's basically like get your affairs in order. In Ireland, traditionally, banshees were connected to specific places or castles or clans. And I often wonder, like, do they, like, follow people? Or are we just seeing, like, new ones? Or do they attach? Some people think that, like, ghosts attach themselves. The woman in white is traditional in like many different, like in Italy, there's like this white woman in a castle and she's all in white. So banshees are sometimes depicted with dark hair in Irish folklore, kind of vampiric looking almost. And
that's sort of what I picture.
In Italy it's sort of more of like a ghostly, but it's a harbinger of death, right? It's just letting you know that somebody's going to die. And it's sort of a warning ghost, really. Like, I think today with modern medicine, you might be able to intervene a little bit more and take it more as a warning. But I've had a few people tell me stories of, like, hearing this, like, really intense moan that just, like, shook their little cabin. And we think that was a banshee. Disembodied heads just floating, which is kind of terrifying. I've had a few stories of that. It's like, well, I saw this thing. It sounds like it might be a banshee. And I was like, well, did anybody die like 2 weeks later? But sometimes you don't always connect those things. But I just find them fascinating. Like La Llorona. So some people also think like banshees, not some people, generally in folklore, the belief is that banshees are either the spirits of women who died in childbirth or women who harmed their own children and then like committed suicide because of that. So there's this sort of really like tragic element of like, is this like, that's the worst thing you could imagine, right? Like just like the most, and as a mother, of course, so you can imagine that's like the worst thing you could imagine. And so there's just this real deep, sorrowful element to them. There's another version that's like a washerwoman who, if you see her in the creek on your way to battle and you look and she's washing out bloody rags, it means you're going to die in the battlefield, and like a whole troop will march by and only a couple of them will see it. So there's a lot of sort of like variations on the banshee, but I really like that they sort of straddle the world between ghosts and fairies. And they, to me, it's kind of the same world, and it's become more and more of the same world the more that I've read about these things and the more I've researched them. We really love to put things in categories. So you're a trooping fairy, you're a cryptid, you're this, you're that. But like even mermaids are considered fairies. They're sea fairies.
Yeah.
So I think just banshees feel like this like infinite black hole that we'll never come back from.
Yeah.
But that I really want to go into and learn more.
Yeah. I can see that. Though they are fascinating.
You know, I'm kind of a hot stove toucher and I like scary things. So
That's great though. They are terrifying. But what's interesting though is as I heard you talking about it, I wasn't so scared anymore. The more like they are terrifying, but as you were talking about it, it's like
you probably won't see one. You'll be all right.
Yeah, I hope not. But it's like they kind of have their place.
They have their place.
And it's,
yes.
Yeah.
And I believe that as with mermaids as well, I've come to the conclusion that mermaids are psychopomps, and a psychopomp is something that transitions a human into the other world, into the world of the afterlife. And mermaids serve that purpose in the ocean, especially during like shipwrecks. So for sailors and pirates and everything, like mermaids, you would see them and they'd be like a bad sign, right? Because they might be a harbinger of something evil, or like someone's going to jump over ship and go and be with them.
Yeah.
But you know, been at sea a long time. But also I think that they represent like they would like sort of take the spirits and like take them and lift them out of the water and convey them to like the afterlife. So I think they have like that kind of psychopomp role, like the Valkyries.
Yeah. That would make sense. That would make a lot of sense. I never thought about it that way, but it makes sense in terms of like why certain people would see them and when and why we don't. And either way, it's
and you don't always
just,
live to tell the tale.
No, you don't. There's probably countless stories that we don't even know.
Right.
And I wanted to ask, and it's okay if you don't want to answer this question because I understand if you want to save them for your books. But have you had any in Paranormal Parlor? You share about some of your own stories with the baby rattle and your apartment where your friend sensed somebody else was there. And by that somebody, they meant a somebody, you know, on the other side. And I love when you include your firsthand accounts. Have you had any encounters since then that maybe weren't in the book? And if so, would you feel comfortable sharing one?
I don't think this one's in the book because I think this started happening to me after I finished that book. So that book in Fairy Spookers and Changelings I wrote after I moved to Minnesota. All the other books I wrote in San Francisco in this like haunted attic apartment that I had, and it just was inevitable that ghosts were going to be involved in that. It was in Old Victorian. So there's a cemetery kind of near my house. I think it's called the Union Cemetery. And I frequently walk. It's a small cemetery, and it's not that far. It's like 3 or 4 blocks. And so I frequently kind of like walk through that cemetery. And after like kind of making that regular, one day I was walking through it and I had sort of like, you know, a lot of people have experiences where they feel something and they get the chills. And that's happened to me plenty. But this was the first time that I had like the I don't even know what to call it, but like the warm chills. So I was walking through the cemetery and I kind of got to this small cemetery. I got to this one part and I just got like this overwhelming like ripple of absolute like buoyant joy and like there's this really warm feeling, and it kind of rippled through me the way like a chill might ripple through your body, but it was all pure warmth.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, I must have just hit like a sun patch or something, right? Like that feeling like when you go out in the sun and you just kind of like, oh, you're warming up.
It's one of my favorite feelings.
Oh, it's the best
exactly
feeling. So I thought, oh, it must have been that. And I just sort of like, okay, had a moment there. And I didn't really, like, this is very common, I think, for most people when you're having some kind of, like, paranormal encounter. Your immediate response is to, you don't think of it as paranormal. You're kind of, like, explaining it away or trying to, like, figure out what happened or investigate what happened, or just, like, it's usually, like, after the fact when you think about it, you're like, that doesn't really make sense. Or you're repeating it to someone and you're like, wait a minute, that was actually kind of freaky. But in the moment, you're just like, oh, okay, so I just hit this, like, warm spot or something. Fine, whatever. And the next time I walked, which was like a couple days later, same exact thing happened. And this time it was a little bit stronger.
In the same spot?
In the same spot. About the same spot, about halfway in the path. And this time it wasn't a sunny day. So I was like, okay, there's a warm spot right here. So I just said hi. I was like, hi. How's it going? Like, I feel you. And then I might not have actually said hi the second time. I might have just been like, okay, that definitely happened. The third time it happened, which was like a couple days later, that time I said hi. And I was just like, okay, I'm acknowledging you and thank you. Like, thanks for making me feel so good. Like, I feel very, I feel warm in this situation. It wasn't like, and then it's happened a few, like, whenever I walk through that cemetery, it doesn't happen every single time, but it happens enough. And I've been sort of like looking at the different headstones. I'm trying to figure out who it is. I was like trying to get a hit on it. But it feels feminine and it feels very welcoming and like kind of youthful. And so that's like a recurring thing. I don't really have anything in my house that I know of. But I have had things appear outside my house.
Really?
Yeah, I had one night that I was falling asleep and heard my name outside my window. And it actually sounded like my brother's voice. And so I sat right up and I peered out the window and there was nobody out there. And I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood. And then the next day I called my brother and I was just like, did you call me in the middle of the night, like just mentally? And he's like, I don't think so. So it was a little weird because I thought like, that sounded like really like a familiar voice. And also as a woman, you're just like, who's outside? Who's on my property? Like saying my name, like this is creepy. And then, I think I've had a few different things happen, just here and there. My brother-in-law passed away actually I have had something in my house now that I think about it. So my brother-in-law passed away a couple years ago, and I've had some recurring things with the fire alarm going off when I've been in the shower. After replacing, it's the first time it happened, I was just like, it happened like about 4 months after he passed away, and I was in the shower, I was home alone, smoke alarm starts going off. And I thought, okay, must have something to do with, so I get out and I get the stool, I'm dripping wet, and I'm trying to unscrew the thing, it's like temporary fix. Get back in the shower, the one in my office starts going off. Get out of the shower, go up, unscrew it. It's like, okay, I guess the batteries were all at the same time. Back in the shower, one in my bedroom starts going off. And then I'm like, all right, I hear you. I know you're here. I don't know what your message is, but I acknowledge you. And so I, replaced all of those. And then about a month later, the same thing happened. It was just the one in the hall and the one in my office that time. And so I just think that he was just passing through and just wanted me to know that he's still around. Apparently, like when I'm in the shower.
Yeah, wow. Great
well, then
timing.
I was like, is it like something in the steam? You're just kind of like rationalizing all of these things, and it may well have been, but that's the only. And then occasionally my front door will just swing open, and it's not windy. Like the storm door will just swing open, and I'm like, hey Steve, how's it going?
How are you? Yeah. Who knows? Maybe like the shower. I know that people are often more open, like just creatively
sometimes,
and stuff in the shower. So it could just be that
the conduit of water. And I think also like my relationship with him, if he was going to contact anyone, it would be me. He would know that I would be like, oh yeah, that's definitely, I would acknowledge that, because we would have a lot of conversations about magic and religion and, you know, all like the kind of intersection between like psychology and spirit and all. So that was totally up his alley. I think I leaned more on the like heathen witch side and he leaned more on the Catholic side, but we still would have a lot of really interesting discussions about the secret language of signs and things like that. So if anyone would pick up on like, you know, I think other members of the family probably would be like, nah. Coincidence. And I'm like, hey, it's him.
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful that you could have that conversation though, both of you. Like, it,
we had arguments over the years, but in the
still.
end, we really were like very. We would have really interesting discussions about it. So yeah,
that's really cool. I haven't experienced a marriage of the two before, so I think it's good to know that it can happen.
Yeah.
Or if I do, if I am speaking to religious family or friends, I kind of come in very gently from the side and find what, you know, when I'm talking about these things and kind of try to code switch and find a way to like fit what I'm saying with what they feel secure in. Does that make sense?
It does, but I don't do that. And part of the reason I don't do that is because it doesn't even occur to me. But that's what comes when you're raised from a witch and you don't even like, I mean, I certainly don't set out to offend people, but then again, I don't think people set out to offend me when they're constantly mentioning God. And sometimes it's annoying, you know? But I have, you know, in my aged wisdom, I have become more aware of the connections between the things and less like, well, you burned us all in the 1600s, so F you, you know?
I think it's okay to kind of go between, you know, like that's.
But it doesn't always occur to me. But then I don't think I'm necessarily. I don't. It just doesn't. I don't even really think about it. I don't think, oh, is this offensive? Maybe I should.
No. It all depends on your audience, and for me, it's very much like I have to go this way. I can't go this way.
Yeah. And I think that happens frequently with family, right? Like it's a big thing with family. And in my family, that's not really an issue.
Yeah.
It just isn't. I have my oldest sibling who's very, very devout. And, you know, years ago, I just said, can we just agree to disagree and not argue? And then we can have like a really good relationship. Yeah. And that's worked out so far, you know.
That's good to hear. That's refreshing.
Well, he's very intelligent, and I see where he's coming from, but it's a little bit of that, like, I'm genuinely concerned for your soul, so I'm gonna like keep telling you this, and it's like, stop arguing with mom about religion, okay? Yeah. She's almost 81, and she's not gonna not become a witch at 81. Like she's basically entering her oracular phase, where you're gonna go to her, and she's just gonna give you like psychic readings. So just leave her alone, okay? Stop arguing with mom.
That sounds amazing. That sounds amazing. I would love that. Just psychic readings regularly, but so Enchanted Plants, that's your new book that's coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because April 7th, it's coming up. People can order it.
Coming right out.
So tell us about it. What's it about?
So it's Enchanted Plants, a botanical treasury of folklore and magic, and it is a collection of fairy tales and folklore as told through the lens of plants. So all of the plants that are in there are really central to whatever story I'm telling. So it kind of started out where one day I was just like reading some fairy tale, some Grimm's fairy tale. And I was like, oh, interesting. You know, like obviously roses come up a lot, but there would be like other plants that would keep appearing in these stories. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if it was like a plant book, but instead of it being like, oh, here's all the lore you'd ever need about this plant, which I love those books, and I'll buy those books, and I have those books, and Meaning of Flowers, all of those things. I'm like, I'll buy them all. I'll buy all the herb books, all the gardening books. But I really wanted to kind of take this like botanical lens to fairy tales. And so the way that I arranged the book is by types of gardens that you might encounter in a fairy tale. So you start out in the Queen's Garden, and there you'll find things like roses. and tulips and sort of those like sort of fancy cultivars that a queen might have in her garden. And once you've finished in the queen's garden, you go round the corner to the cottage garden, and that's where a lot of the edible foods are grown. That's where you find your garlic and your turnips and your cabbage. And then you go a little further down the crooked lane and you hit the witch's garden, and that's where all the poisonous plants are. That's the one you go in under cover of night, and you don't tell anyone you're there, so they don't know what you're up to. Once you've had your harvest in the witch's garden, you gather your basket and you get on your horse and you head out into the meadows, and from there you go into the woods, and then eventually you hit the sea. And so that's how I arranged the book, so that you actually go on this journey. Hopefully that comes through when you read it, but even if it doesn't, you've got all these different sections with the different plants. And that's not to say there aren't edible plants in a different section, but they sort of belong in certain places. So the best example I can give you of a story of a plant being central to a story is the story of Rapunzel. So a couple really interesting things about Rapunzel. First of all, the very word Rapunzel is a German word for a plant called rampion. Oh. So that's where the Grimm brothers got the name Rapunzel. And in that story, the story starts out, the whole reason that the baby gets promised to the witch is because there's a man and a woman. They really want to have a child, but they have been trying for years, typical kind of setup. And they live next door to this witch, and they look over into the witch's garden, and she sees this plant growing, and it's this leafy, green, beautiful plant, and she has this insatiable craving for it. So she convinces her husband to go climb over the fence and get her some. So he does, and she comes back, she makes herself her salad, and she snarfs it down, she just eats it, she just loves it so much. And she says, you have to get me more. She's basically totally addicted to it. So he sneaks over a second time, he gets some more, and he comes back. She eats it all up really quickly, and she says, you must get me more. Well, the third time, the witch confronts him, and it's like, what are you doing? Why are you stealing from my garden? And he says, he explains, he's like, my wife just, I had to do this for my wife. And so the witch says, no problem. You can have all the rampion you want from my garden, but you have to give me your firstborn child. Well, his wife is just like basically foaming at the mouth for this stuff, right? And they don't think they're going to have a child because, of course, they've been trying for years. So he agrees without consulting his wife. Bad move.
That's an issue.
Gets back. Guess what? We can have all the rampion we ever want from the garden. Well, it turns out she's pregnant. I think the reason she was craving the rampion is because she was probably pregnant all along, because you're craving the iron, and rampion is very high in iron, like other leafy green vegetables. So anyway, long story short, they trade the baby. She has the baby. She finds out she's pregnant, eats all the rampion she wants, has the baby. The witch shows up, takes her away, names her Rapunzel after the plant, and puts her in the tower in the forest. And so that story, rampion used to be grown, it grows wild in the forests of Germany, but it used to be grown and cultivated as a salad green much more frequently, up until probably the early 20th century. And it's a beautiful leafy green plant with little purple flowers. It's very beautiful. And without that plant, you would not have the story. In fact, you wouldn't even have the name Rapunzel were it not for that plant. Wow. So that's my best example of why, of a story really being how I tried to explore that botanical lens. The story would change, and the story does change if it's a different plant, which sometimes happens. You have the juniper tree, and then there's a version of that with a rose bush. Same idea, stepmom kills one of the kids, buries her under the tree, and, gruesome things ensue. Same kind of basic principle, but in one it's a juniper tree, and in another it's a rose bush, and a little a little bird kind of reveals her evil ways. So, so that is I didn't just pick my favorite plants. If I had picked my favorite plants, the book would be 3 times as long, and I probably wouldn't have been able to get it published. So I had this crazy long list of plants, and then I just tried to narrow it down by plants that met all the criteria. There was at least one or more strong stories that the plant was central to. There was something interesting about the plant's medicinal and magical properties, which is true of every plant. So that part was kind of easy in a way. And then like in some cases there's a little excerpt from Alice in Wonderland in there, but I also rewrote a lot of the fairy tales because I just felt like it, it's just fun to do that and retell them. There's just sort of this like wide array of plants that are in there, and that was kind of the idea of it.
Wow. Plants and trees are kind of galaxies in themselves, so it's no surprise that they are central to lots of stories. And for those listening, one of the things I love about Varla's books is that she kind of holds your hand and takes you on a journey. As you can even hear her speak, I hope you're picking up on that she takes you on a journey every time you talk to her, and that's what I love about her. But in her books, she kind of holds your hand for a while, escorting you into this world of the magical, but then kind of just says, jump, good luck, and it's really, it's like this, it's the most, I would describe like her as an author as kind of one of the most adventurous companions you might have, but you've got to be able to stand on your own 2 feet to read her stories. Yeah, you've got to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. And with these plants in these gardens, I didn't realize that, you kind of go from one to the next, the witch's garden at night. And that's really beautiful. So I'm so excited to read this book. I've pre-ordered mine. And so you can get it wherever books are sold,
yeah,
right?
Anywhere books are sold. Yeah. It's out officially April 7th. I think some of the smaller booksellers have gotten it in stock a little earlier, but yeah, anywhere books are sold, you can do all the major, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, your local bookstore. It's widely distributed. It should be available I believe it's available in Canada and the UK in May. Canada might be just a couple weeks later than the US, and I think it's available in the UK and Europe in it's like a month delay or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, it's called Enchanted Plants by Varla Ventura, and you can also get her other books that I've been talking about in all the same places, correct?
Yep.
Okay, I believe so, and it's well worth the read. And so I've got just 2 more questions for you before we wrap up, and the first one is, do you have more stories coming? Things that I thought you maybe alluded to one a little bit earlier. Okay, so you've got more books coming.
So, well, I have, this isn't a book, but actually it's Born Today, or officially like Born Today. So a friend of mine, I mentioned his name earlier, his name's Jeff Belanger. He started a zine called Shadow Zine.
Oh.
And it's basically the idea of like print only. There's no digital form of it. You can't get it online. You can't buy it on Amazon. You have to get it directly from the author of the zine or from the publisher. So he's the publisher. He wrote issue number 1, which is all about this place called the Bridgewater Triangle, which is this area in Massachusetts that all this weird stuff happens. So kind of like a Bermuda Triangle. The second one is all about Cornwall, and this wonderful author named Richard Estep wrote it, and it's about like everything from like pixies and mermaids to ghosts, and he actually was in Cornwall, I think, when he was writing it.
Wow.
So that's just he's British by birth, but he was over there on like a trip or something, or investigating a haunted castle, and he's a wonderful writer. So that was issue 2, and issue 3 is mine. And this is a story that I touched on in Paranormal Parlor, and I always wanted to tell the full version of it. And this is the story of a woman who channeled a novel via the Ouija board that she claimed was told to her through Mark Twain, through the ghost of Mark Twain. And there's a lot to the story. There's this background to like her and how she came to like know Mark Twain, how she came to get involved in like the Psychical Research Society and having her own Ouija board, a friend of hers that became this very famous channeler, that this woman, Emily Grant Hutchings, was actually introduced and conned her friend into coming with her to like do this, to do the board together, the spirit board, the Ouija board. And then it's sort of her story of like how she wrote it. And there's all these amazing details. Like they took India ink and they put like apostrophes and semicolons onto the board so that the planchette could move, and the ghost didn't have to say that was a parenthetical statement. It could just go to the parentheses marks.
Yeah,
so it's like this beautiful,
nice.
beautiful story. And then there's this whole controversy that came out. And she was sued. Her and her publisher were sued because she used the name Mark Twain, and that was supposed to be protected by copyright. And it was like the daughter and the Harper brothers were suing. It was just this wild thing. And there's more to the story, and then there's a couple of other people that also claim to channel Twain. And I actually went down to the downtown Minneapolis library because they have in their rare book room, which if you've never been there, it's absolutely gorgeous. And they have in their rare book room, they have a whole Mark Twain collection. And in that Mark Twain collection is this book that was channeled in the 1960s called God Bless You, Daughter. And it's this woman's conversation with the ghost of Twain. And I hadn't really heard of it. And Jeff told me about it. And so I was kind of researching it. And I was like, I need to read it. I need to actually like read the whole thing. So I went down there and spent an afternoon reading it. And it was fascinating. It was definitely a very interesting read. So this zine is out now. I think it's like it just got off the press today. And so if you go to shadowzine.com, that's where you can find information about all the different issues that are available. It's $10, includes shipping. And then I will have some copies that are making their way to me that I can sell as well. So that's the only way to get them, though. You can either get them through shadowzine.com or you can get them from me directly at events or Jeff or Richard at their events. So and then there's there'll be future editions of that. So that's fun. I've had that project kind of going on. And then I have a couple of books in the works always. I think my bio says, generally I've authored several books and I'm working on several more.
Good.
So I have a couple kind of they're both kind of follow-ups to Enchanted Plants. So we'll see. We're kind of like waiting to see how things go. I think they'll get back to me at the end of April, my current publisher, if they're interested. And if they're not interested, then I'm going to sell them to somebody else.
Well, they need to be out there. They need to be. Wow. Yeah, I'm definitely going to check out the Shadow Zine because I want to read yours, but the other
you'll love all of them actually. Yeah, they're wonderful, and they're just like 28 pages long. A zine is basically like, I don't know if you were around in the 90s and the early 2000s, but it was all about zines then, and 80s and 90s. We had a lot of fun with zines, and you could just go into like, people would be going into like Kinko's or whatever the copy store was and just like stapling these like hand copied it could be about anything, adventures on the road or poetry or whatever it was. And so this is kind of specifically about like paranormal topics. And Jeff's a wonderful writer and a curator of all that kind of stuff. So
I believe it. Yeah, he was in your books, right? Yeah. I recognize that.
Yeah, we've been friends for a number of years, so.
That's wonderful. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you would like to share?
Just that if, I have some upcoming events. I have a series of presentations built around enchanted plants. I'm working right now with some local places. So like I'm working with like the Hennepin County Library and the Ramsey County Libraries around here to get some events that I can do these enchanted plants talks where I basically kind of take you through the different stories. And then the end of May, beginning of June, I have a couple of weeks when my publisher's in Massachusetts, and so I'm actually going around to a bunch of the libraries in kind of like the western edge of the Boston area. And doing a bunch of talks there. So on my website, if you look, it's like varlaventura.net, and then there's just like an appearances, and that's where like various like when this is going live, I'll put that on there.
Okay.
So people can click on that and listen, but also if I'm doing any like live appearances. So we have the book launch on the full moon here in White Bear. So that's coming up in May. And so I'm just, got that stuff going on and cooking up new things. And hopefully we'll spend a good portion of the summer writing a new book. I have if I'm not writing for a deadline, what I write is I tend to write like fiction and just kind of play around with things. When I get these kind of like book ideas, I usually have this like structure, and then I try and sell them before I write a lot of them.
Okay.
So I write like a really robust proposal, and I think of how I want the book to be. But at this stage, I tend to like really need that deadline because otherwise I'll just go write something else that I'm going to get paid for.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And let me tell you, you don't make a lot of money as an author. So that's why most authors do multiple things. They do presentations, and they, have other like writing gigs, and they do teaching, and they appear at conferences and things like that, because you will not get rich on your royalties unless you're like a thriller writer and you sell movie rights or something, or you've just written so many books, or you hit something, which I mean, I would love for this book to end up as like an exhibit at a botanical garden, or in conservatories and things. I would love for there to be an integration of the fairy tales with the plants that are existing in these like arboretums and things. So that's a big vision. But
do you think the Renaissance Festival would be open to something like that?
That would be so fun.
You know what I mean? Like,
because just think of the outfits.
Yep. Yeah. I could see that working, and I could see that being open. That would be
anyone out there, any people in charge of any Ren fairs anywhere in the world, but especially in the country, like contact me. You can contact me through my website.
Yep, and I will link the website, but just so you heard, it's varlaventura.net. So VARLAVENTURA.net. Teacher in me just
Good
it's
job.
like I see
amazing.
in words. So so go check out her website. You can also access your books there too, right? But any upcoming events and appearances will all be scheduled there too, so you know where to find. Okay. Perfect. I can't thank you enough for coming here. More than anything, it was just a joy to finally get to talk to you about all of these beautiful journeys that you've taken on. And again, I just really have to emphasize the point that I'm so grateful that you answered your calling and you created these, because in addition to just the immense amount of knowledge that my listeners have heard from you, but also that you've put into these books, I really mean it when I say it kind of pulls the reader back into the magical. And for those of us who were not raised with it as kind of just an everyday part of who we are, it kind of gives us permission to access that again. And it was really a gift to be able to read these. And I'm so glad that it's continuing. Like I feel almost like a child sitting here like, okay, the journey's not over. The journey's not over. There's more and more
I'll be
coming,
writing till I die, hopefully. But
good.
Well, thank you. And it's actually just such a pleasure. So many times I do interviews, and it's over Zoom or over the phone, and it's just such a pleasure to be in the same room with the person that's interviewing you, and your wonderful, wonderful, thoughtful questions. And I just appreciate your insight and your graciousness.
Oh, thank you. Very, very happy to do it. This is a gift for me. So as always, listeners, I appreciate you too and taking the time to spend with us today. And on a final note, again, as you know, thanks for coming.